Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. I always feel weird doing, Beware of Spoilers for documentaries, because, like, a documentary isn't really, like, by definition, you shouldn't, like, a documentary isn't going to have anything to spoil. I mean, there are exceptions, like, the Jinx's ending is giant, like the way that, he confesses at the very end where he's like, they know you did it, when he's talking to himself like a crazy person, which, I mean, he's committed multiple murders, so yeah, that makes sense. But in that, in that end, like, that's a pretty big reveal that, like, you don't want spoiled for you if you're going into it watching, which, apologies if you have not seen The Jinx yet, but Robert Durst died recently in prison, so don't know how, at this point, if you haven't seen it yet, you probably didn't want to see it, or, already knew that happened. But it's infrequent that, like, a documentary has something that can be spoiled in it. Because by definition, documentary is going to tell you about things that that have happened. And with this one's fairly recent. We're talking about Downfall, the Case Against Boeing, which debuted on Netflix this Friday after its, time at Sundance. And this is, it tells the story of why the crashes of the 737 MAX happened. And it does a pretty good job of that. Like, the thing is, it's like, as these things are unfolding in real time, it's easy to lose track of what happens in these cases. Because, like, as it unfolds in real time, your life gets in the way of following the story. And it's not like they do, like, a previously on each time they have, like, a news story where it's like, we talked about this, and this, here's the new information. It's like, adding on to our previous reporting, here's our new stuff. It's not like one long article. It's like, we talked about this, we'll assume you have read that, and then we'll move on from there. And that is, like, I don't think that, it should be done where a news organization should sit there and be like, A, B, C, D, like, here's what happened every time. But for something like this, continuous reporting is important. Mm-hmm. And especially considering it's a rapidly unfolding story where the first two major events, that happened in the public eye, which are two major plane crashes, happened months apart. So keeping in line with, like, boom, 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 this documentary kind of puts into 2 hours, so it condenses the timeline a little bit, so it makes it a little bit easier to digest and easier to understand. So it tells the story of what caused the two planes to crash in the first place, which is the MCAS system that was installed in an effort to... Because here's how I understood it, and I hope I understood this right. So you have, Airbus released an airplane that was more fuel efficient, and the reason for this is, fuel efficiency became the name of the game in the 2000s and 2010s, because gas prices went up. So because gas prices went up, it became more important to create a fuel-efficient airplane. Airbus did it, passed FAA regulations, and started selling it, and they were outselling Boeing by a substantial margin. So Boeing wanted to, regain their market share. So what Boeing did was they modified their 737 with a more fuel-efficient engine, but it did cause a nose dipping issue, which is why they installed the MCAS system. And the MCAS system would level out the plane in the event the nose started to dip. It would auto-do that, assuming that all the instruments worked correctly on the plane. And it's an interesting kind of, it's that whole situation. So as this unfolds and as we find out more about what happened and what went on behind the scenes at Boeing, we find out why the plane ended up the way it was. It was all about cost cutting. It was all about doing it where they didn't have to go through regulation, doing it in a way where they would hide from pilots and from airlines that they had to, training was probably necessary, but they were insistent that it wasn't. And then they talked about, they attempted to gaslight the pilots and be like, no, we told you about this. And it's like, well, no, you didn't. And it's kind of an interesting kind of look at that. and how they tried to blame, everyone but themselves for what happened on these planes. Like, it was not their fault that the thing went down. The planes went down. It was pilot error. And, like, maybe for one plane you can buy that, but for two planes, therein lied the issue. And it's like they try to be like, oh, they're foreign pilots. They're not American pilots. American pilots wouldn't have made that issue. It's that kind of thing where it's like they're trying to distance it, where it's like it's not their fault, it's other countries' fault and other pilots' fault. And it does paint a pretty damning picture of the corporate culture that emerged in Boeing, resulting from their merger, and what they're trying to do to appease Wall Street. And it does paint that picture pretty well. Here's my problem, though. To say that it's strictly Boeing and Boeing's corporate culture feels disingenuous. And the movie does go out of its way to make it look like the government is all 100% in the right all the time. And it's like, oh, the poor FAA got the wool pulled over its eyes by Boeing because Boeing was trying to do something illegal. And it's like, well, no. Like, and then as they start laying out timing, like, well, the FAA had information before the second plane went down that would have prevented that second plane from going down had they taken action, and they didn't. Like, and it's like they talked about how very early on they mentioned, like, they went into a meeting with the FAA and the lobbyists were with them. And then I looked into it. If you go to opensecrets.org, you can see, you can type in your representative or your senator if you're in the United States. You can see how much money gets donated to them from various organizations. And Boeing is the 14th largest lobbying group in the United States. They put in like $13 million in lobbying. And then it's like, every other country around the world starts, grounding 737 MAXs. And then Elaine Chao, who was the Secretary of Transportation at the time, goes up on TV and is like, well, we don't have, we're going to look at the situation and take it very seriously, move on from there. And it's like, well, you knew that there was an issue. Like, the FAA had a report saying that, like, 15 more flights could go down in the next 2 years if they don't do something to resolve it. So you would think that they would ground the flights. But, like, Boeing said to them, like, no, we'll fix it. It's okay. We'll fix it with a software update. And then once we fix it, all the problems will be solved. And it'll be okay. And we'll all sit down and we'll have cake and everything. It's great. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, should the government be held blameless in this? And then, like, they pressed criminal charges against Boeing for defrauding the FAA, which, yeah, they defrauded the FAA by going out of their way to mislead about what was necessary for this plane to fly and what training was needed to be done and what changes were being made between the older 737 model and the 737 MAX to make it the new model. They were intentionally misleading. And they... yeah, that happened, but they let them settle without charges being, formally brought against the company on the grounds that, they paid, like, $2 billion. And it's like, okay, so, like, they just paid $2 billion and didn't have to, have this all go public? Like, that doesn't seem like in the best interest of safety. Like, am I wrong? Like, if we're talking about public safety here, it's like, that seems to not be the issue. And, look, I understand that, after a certain point, there is, like, we have to look at this broadly and be like, there hasn't been, any more crashes after that, and they all got grounded, and the problem got fixed and all of that. But the way that they did everything that happened leading up to this point is incredibly suspect. And it should make people hesitant to be like, hang on, what happened here could very well happen again. Because Boeing does not seem interested in making sure that these issues don't arise again. It's not in their financial interests. It's in their financial interest to create more airplanes and sell more airplanes. If they do that by lying, like, that's the thing, is they should have been brought on fraud to, the airlines they were selling to. Like, that, because they were defrauding them as well, and that's a big deal. So, like, for this documentary to put on this show of being like, look, we're like, the government is going to always have your best interest. It's like, well, the government didn't in this case. The government very clearly didn't. And that case is laid out kind of explicitly, but also is not the forefront of the discussion. The forefront of the discussion is what went on with, what's what I'm looking for here? What went on with Boeing, within Boeing, and not how the FAA, handled the information that was being provided by Boeing. What was the FAA being told? That was a question that I would have liked to have seen get presented to the experts. Like, this information was provided to Boeing. What should Boeing have done with this information? This is the information that was provided by Boeing to the FAA. What should the FAA have done with this information? And that would have been an interesting approach to take. I would have liked to have seen that explained a little bit better. But besides that, it's a great documentary, very interesting and very, very, very informative. Definitely worth a watch. You can watch it on Netflix. So until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.